This, if you get it right, is one of the most profitable ways that you can get cash flow, real money in your bank. To talk it through, please help me welcome back Simon Zutshi.
Andy. Okay, so multi-let properties. How many of you have already got multi-lets? Show of hands. A few of you? Almost. Who's hoping to get a multi-let? Okay, good, good. If you'd like to get your flow charts out, please. We'll just remind ourselves about where this is on the flow chart. Now, get your flow charts out. Right, top left-hand corner of your flow chart. What's box number 1? Are they motivated sellers? You should start to know this stuff, guys. Are they motivated sellers? If they're yes, motivated seller, where do we move? Move down. Next question is, so equity in the property. If there's no equity in the property, where do we go? Move to the right, and the box is? How about we all do this together, guys? So if there's no equity in the property, the answer is no. Where do we move? To the right. And what's the question? Why do we ask about an option at this point, do you reckon? What's one of the criteria we look for to identify someone who might be prepared to do an option? They don't get the money now. If there's no equity and someone's selling a property, they're not going to get any money now, are they? They're not selling to raise money. They're selling because they need to get rid of the debt. Yep, so that's why that particular question comes there. Now, what if they won't do an option? So hang on a minute. They really want to sell. They won't do an option. We're not going to get a discount. Why on earth would we do that? It's on the flow chart, yeah? There are no trick questions here, guys. So we move, so no equity, the answer's no. Won't do an option, no. Where do we go? And the next box on the, no, we go along. If the answer's no, the next answer on the flow chart is, would it work for an HMO? So here's the point. And a mistake many people make on Mastermind is that they think they always have to get a deal, okay? Now, I'll take on some responsibility here. In Property Magic, we talk about the golden rules, don't we? And the first golden rule, we said buy below market value from a motivated seller. Now, I'm going to change that in the next edition to buy from a motivated seller. Because sometimes I've seen people, they'll go and a property's on the market for 100,000. And I think, I can't pay the asking price. I've got to get a discount. If they don't get a discount, they don't buy it. And what they sometimes don't realize is actually maybe it's worth 130, but it's already on at a good price. That comes down to knowing your area, doesn't it? If you know your area and you see it for 100, you'll know, hang on, that should be worth 120, 130. So you'll spot a good deal. So you don't always have to get a discount. In fact, how many of you know Paul Ribbons? Yeah, you've read about Paul Ribbons of YPM Magazine. He's one of our graduates. He's been in property 25 years, and he buys properties generally from estate agents and open market, from open market and direct from sellers, and he sells them in auction. And very often he pays the market price or even slightly more than the asking price because actually it's already priced very competitively. And all the idiots who don't know what they're doing think they've got to offer less than the asking price. And he realizes actually it's a really good deal. So that's just a little point I want to make sure. Don't think you always have to get a discount from the advertised price because it might already be priced to sell. And because you're being greedy, you lose a great deal. Okay, so that's one point. The other thing is maybe something's at true market value. It's worth 100. You can get it for 100. They won't do an option. Why on earth would you buy it? Maybe because it's great cash flow. That's box number 7 because it would work as a multi-let. So that's what we're going to focus on mainly today. If it doesn't work as a multi-let, because one of the things about a multi-let is location, then we go along again, and there might be other reasons we might buy, such as adding value, planning permissions, freehold, leasehold, etc., etc. But multi-let is a great strategy that I want you to be aware of, because you can just make such good money from it. I believe it should be part of your portfolio. So I talk about a particular type of multi-lets, and I do young professionals. So imagine this, someone who's being at university, probably, not necessarily, but probably being at university or college. They've gone into their first job. They're living away from home. Probably because maybe they don't want to live at home or they're just working in a different city. And they come to the city. They don't know that many people. So actually, they'd rather live with other like-minded people, similar kind of age. They've got some instant people they can go out for a drink with, for example. And also, it's the most cost-effective way for them to live. That's my target market. That's what I'm going to talk about. Multi-lets could be students. And students are similar, but they're kind of obviously just a couple of years younger, but very similar kind of mindset and mentality. The difference with the students is very often they'll come as a group of 3, 4, 5, 6 students. They'll come together. Whereas the multi-lets I do, I'm letting individual rooms to people who maybe don't necessarily know each other before they're in the house. Sometimes they live with the friends, but usually it's 1 or 2 people here and there, where students come as a whole group. So there's some real advantages to students. And then there's a third type, which is to people on benefits. LHA, Local Housing Authority. I personally don't do that one. People like, do you know Jim Halliburton? Yeah, Jim Halliburton, again, a graduate of Mastermind. He does a lot of LHA people, and that's his niche, but they do need a lot more work and management. So I'm looking at kind of the top end of the market. And that's kind of where my speciality is. So I'll share with you my point of view, take from it what you want, basically. So the way I like to talk about this is thinking about what makes a good deal for you. And this is really important. You need to recognize what is a good deal for you. If you're investing your money or you're investing other people's money. The great thing about a multi-let is you get such good cash flow, you can generally afford to use someone else's money as the deposit. And remember, initially, we're not even talking about buying at a discount here. We're talking about finding a property that stacks up, buying at the full price. Now, if you then add this to buying at a discount and you refinance 6 to 12 months later, the numbers get even better. Or you could combine this strategy with options, which is what we're going to talk about this afternoon. But let's just keep it simple at the moment on a pure multi-let to make sure everyone understands this particular strategy. So what is going to work for you? Let's say we've got a property, and this is in your workbooks, obviously, and your property's worth £100,000, and you'd have to put a $25,000 deposit in. So little exercise for you to work out here. Assuming the interest rate's 6%, bit of revision, just don't say to anyone else, just write in your workbook, what would the mortgage cost you each month? You should all know how to do this. You've got a £75,000 mortgage, 6% a month, 6% a year, beg your pardon. How much does it cost you each month in interest? Okay, write it down in your workbook. If you need to use a calculator, fine. Do it on a piece of paper, do it in your head. But you should all know how to work this out. It's a bit of a revision here. Some people are still writing. Now, if you're not sure about how to do this, make a little mental note. And this is something great you should be talking to your buddy or your coach about. Because if you don't know, ask your buddy. Your buddy teaches you. They're helping you and helping themselves. Okay? Very simply, would anyone like to shout out the answer? 375. Yeah, pretty straightforward. Okay? So if that was the cost of the mortgage, what would the estimated costs be each month? In terms of what would a mortgage valuer, a surveyor, sorry, what would a surveyor estimate as the costs to be? Remember how we work this out? We take the monthly interest and we multiply it by what? 1.25, the rate multiplier, and to work out how much we need. Okay, so roughly £470. Okay? So we know the rent needs to be over that to make cash flow. Now this is just a very rough rule of thumb, isn't it? And obviously if you had an apartment, because service charges, you probably need a bit more. This is just a very quick, rough and ready calculation. Does it stack up? So here's the question. Assuming it was in a good area, and it meets all the other rules, you know you could rent this out, You think there'd be good capital appreciation long term. You had the money to invest, okay? Here's the question. So would you buy the property if the rent was £500? And what I would do is in your workbook, work out what the cash flow would be. So if the rent was just 500, based on these figures, how much would the cash flow be? Per month. I know this is really going back to basics, but I just want to make it's really important you understand this stuff. Because this is what you should be doing, is analysing, but saying, look, understanding what are your criteria? What conditions do they have to meet for you to want to invest in it, to make it a good deal for you? So we're going through the thinking process of what makes a good deal for you. Okay? Now, what if the rent was £600 per month? An extra £100, how much would you make each month? There's a hint here, an extra 100 probably. And then, I know, we keep it simple. By the way, would you like me to do a really complicated, confusing way, or just keep it really simple? Simple's good, isn't it? Okay. And then obviously the rent was 700, 800, etc., etc. You can work out what the cash flow would be. So here's the question. Would you buy it? And just look at those and work out, just have a little quick off the top of your head, would you buy it if the rent was 500? Just cross buy it or tick buy it? Yes, you would. No, you wouldn't. Would you buy it if the rent was 600? Would you, wouldn't you? Would you buy it if it was 700? Yes, no. Would you buy it if it was 800? Yes, no. Okay, just answer that so you're kind of thinking about the kind of cash flow you want to achieve. But remember, it's not just about cash flow, is it? It's about return on investment. So how much money have we had to put in compared to how much money does it generate every single month or every single year? So we use the return on investment calculation. So what we do is we say, okay, return on investment is obviously your annual profit, how much you make each year. So let's say, in this case, we're going to say, let's say the rent was 700. So you know how much cash flow, from we just worked out above, how much cash flow you're going to get each month. Work out what will you make each year. Divide that by the investment. How much is the investment in this particular case? 25. And you multiply it all by 100 to get a percentage. So just work out what's the percentage return on investment on this particular property if you're getting £700 income per month. Again, this is stuff you should know how to do. Now, you might want to create a spreadsheet to do this for you. That's fine. But you need to understand the calculations, the assumptions behind it to be able to put the spreadsheet together. That's why we deliberately don't give you a spreadsheet, because it can be dangerous if people put your figures and not understanding what's behind it. So just work out what the return on investment is. If you're struggling, if you see your partner next to you struggling, you might want to help them a little bit. And then we decide, based on £700 rental, based on the purchase price, assume you're buying at full price, nothing special here. Based on the return on investment, would you buy this property? I want you to be able to answer yes or no to would you buy this property. Okay? So just work out what the return is and then answer that question, and then we'll see a show of hands. Who would, who wouldn't? No right or wrong, it's just your personal criteria. Okay, guys, so assuming this is a reasonable area, it's going to get good growth in the future, and you think there's a good rental demand in this area, how many of you would do this particular property based on these figures? Show of hands. Okay? And that's interesting. Okay, so what do we think the return on this is? Return on investment? 11%. Okay? So you need to work out, is that good enough for you or not? And, work out, are you going to do these things, or do you need better return on investments? So you might say, yeah, that's okay, but that's not quite enough for me. So you might think, okay, well, how can we find properties that are going to give us that kind of return? I mean, £700 on 100, I'm just picking arbitrary figures, £700 on a £100,000 property, you might think that's quite good, you might think it's a lot. How can we do that? Well, there are a number of ways we can rent out property. First one is we could do an AST. Do you think generally having a family, a single person, or whatever it might be, in a property on one contract, do you think we'd get £700 on a £100,000 property? Probably not. Not really, not in most areas anyway, okay? So an AST probably wouldn't work. The other thing we could do short-term let. So in city centres, have you ever seen they have these service departments where you can go for a night or a week, etc.? Sometimes people prefer those to hotels because it's a bit more like being at home than being in a hotel room. You've got your own washing machine and things like that. And they charge by the week. And so certainly on a short-term let for a flat in a good location, city centre, could you get £700, do you reckon? £100,000 flat, could you? You probably could. You probably could get more than that, but you're going to have to pay the utilities and bills, okay? The other one is you could do LHA, Local Housing Authority, and some of the strategies we talk about where you maximise the income, which again we're going to teach you in future workshops. There's quite a lot of stuff on the forum about it. We're having different people in. It's kind of a bit like a multi-let, but it's not quite a multi-let. That can give you certainly very good income on a £100,000 property over and above 700. But the other way is, we're going to focus on today, is what we call HMO, House of Multiple Occupation, or what other people call multi-let. Now, let me just give you kind of different definitions. My definition of a multi-let, and it's kind of a global definition really, is a property that's got 2 or more unrelated people living there. So you might have a family of 4 living in a house on one contract. The 4 people living there, but that's not considered a multi-let. They're all related, okay? If you had 2 people under different contracts, that would be considered a multi-let, okay? Because you're letting to more than one party, if you like. Does that make sense? Yeah. Now, different people define multi-lets in different ways. So the tax man, for example, will call a multi-let any property that has 2 or more people. 2 or more people. In many local governments, planning departments, they'll say a multi-let is a property with 3 or more people. When it comes to licensing and planning are very different, we'll talk about this later, most councils are 5 or more people. So there are different definitions, and people are going to get caught up in, is it an HMO, is it multi-let? My belief that an HMO, a House of Multiple Occupation, is a subset of multi-lets. Does that make sense? So it's a type of multi-let. And let's just keep that as a really simple definition. So multi-let, more than one unrelated person living there. An HMO is a House of Multiple Occupation, generally the type that you need to have a license on. Okay? Now, stepping back just for a minute, thinking about you and your strategy. It's quite a good likeness, really, I think. Anyway, there's you. And a lot of people say, well, I'm going to buy some properties. And you live here, and they're going to buy first property over here, and then they buy a property down here, and buy a property here. These are all around town, these properties, and buy a property here, and buy a property over here. Okay? And they buy 5 separate properties. Now, obviously, when you buy a property, if you were managing them yourself, though I don't recommend you do that, if you manage them yourself, occasionally you're going to have to go to this property, aren't you? And occasionally you're going to have to go to this property, and occasionally you're going to have to go to this property, and occasionally this one, and occasionally this one. Okay? And that's something you're going to have to do if you're managing your properties. And one of the beliefs about a multi-let is that it's a lot of work. And people say, well, this is a real pain. What I'd love to do is I would love to have a street where I own a load of properties in the same road. 5 houses in the same street. Anyone like the idea of that? Be good, wouldn't it? I've got a road in Birmingham, I own 4. So I haven't quite got to 5 yet, but I've got 4 in one road. The benefit of this is that when you go to one of these properties, very quickly you could pop into the others, sort out them. So instead of having to go to each of these every so often, you could go here every so often and pop into each different house. Would that be useful? Yeah. Would that save time doing this rather than going to 5 different properties spread all over the city, do you reckon? Yeah. It's going to be more time effective, isn't it? Yeah. I believe a multi-let is just like this. But instead of 5 properties in the same street, it's effectively like 5 properties, 5 contracts within the same house, the same building. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I don't think, actually, if you're organised and you pick the right kind of tenants, that this is any more work than having 5 spread out properties. In fact, I think this is probably less work and a better return on your money. Does that make sense? Yeah. And is it easier to buy one house, or does it take more effort to buy 5 houses? What takes more effort? 5. So why not focus on just buying these where you're getting a great rental income? So I don't think multi-lets are much more work, and I think actually they get a much better return on investment than a standard property. So let's look at the typical kind of return you could get. So let's say your property worth a couple of £100,000, and you know, I mean, that's maybe quite expensive, depending where you're buying. Someone said to me on Accelerator, oh, well, that's, you're talking about houses less than 250,000. That's all right if you live up north. Doesn't work down south. And I then explained about the property that I bought in London for 162,000 that we rent for 1,900. She went, oh, there's property everywhere if you know where to look. Maybe not where you live, but within half an hour of where you live, there will be property that works. So let's say you've got a property worth 500,000 and you rent out 5 rooms at £350 per month. Now, 350, again, depending on the area, you might get a lot more rent for that, you might get less. The house might be cheaper, it might be expensive. It does vary around the country. I'm just picking some average figures to show you kind of the general principle. Now, when it comes to rent, the amount of rent you get will depend on the size of the room, the facilities in the house, the competition in the market, etc., etc. But 350 is probably a kind of an average. And when I price my rooms, here's what I think about. And I want you to think about where you live right now. Think about where the town or city you live in. What's the cheapest possible accommodation, apart from a shared room in a house, that someone could buy? Or rent, sorry. What's the cheapest place someone can live? It's going to be a studio, bedsit, yep. So if someone lives in a studio, how much does it cost to rent a studio in your area? Think about it. Maybe write down how much it costs to live in a studio.